If you are writing your MBA applications this year, you know that invariably most schools end up asking you to showcase your profile, asking you to differentiate you among the other applicants who are applying along with you. If this is a question that is troubling you, in this video, I'm going to give you a detailed analysis of how to approach these kind of questions. Please stay with me till the end and I'm going to show you how to get this done. So in case you have been watching the CrackVerbal videos, you realize that we bring a lot of content that is going to help you write better. It is going to help you strategize better for your MBA applications. In case you have not already done so, make sure that you go ahead and subscribe and also hit the bell icon, so that way in case we have new videos, you get to know about it first. One question that a lot of students have is, what do I really tell the B schools? How do I really differentiate my profile? What do I say? Because there are so many things for me to say, correct? Well, I'm going to give you a framework by which answering such questions is going to become very easy. The framework really consists of three parts. The first part is what I call as the ideation phase. The second part is the structuring phase. And the third part is the writing phase. So let's look at each of these phases. The first phase, which is the ideation phase. Now, what you want to do in the ideation phase is you really want to go broad, correct? You want to kind of capture as many things as possible that you think are stories that really, kind of tell me or tell the admission committee more about you. Right? So what I would do is I would take post-it notes. So you get these yellow small post-it notes. Try to take a marker or a Sharpie and just write down each story that you think makes sense and put it up on a wall, maybe next to where you're studying or maybe at home, correct? So just as and when you remember stories, you want to probably put on that wall. Now what you can do parallelly is take a different colored, post-it note and try to put the traits that you think are unique to you. So you want to take a different color, let's say it's blue, and in that blue thing, you want to put the traits, right? What do you think is a trait that really resonates with you? What does, how are you defined? Correct? So for that, you could say, okay, one trait that kind of maybe is unique to me is integrity, right? I'm very high on integrity. You want to put that as a trait. At this point, it might be a good thing to go and ask people around you. It could be your parents, it could be your siblings, it could be your friends, right? And just tell them that, hey, I'm applying to a B school and one of the fundamental things for me is to basically figure out my story. Can you tell me which of these, can you tell me a story that you think I should be talking to someone about, right? Is there a particular trait about me that you think is unique? So you get a little bit more yellow post-its, you get a little bit more blue post-its, right? And you kind of stick it on the wall. The reason you want to kind of go broad in your ideation phase is just to kind of explore that, all the aspects, all the phases in your life so that you kind of get a list of, possible stories that you can use in the MBA applications, right? So that's the first part, which is ideation. Now, the second part is what I would call as the structuring, which means, unfortunately, we can't be doing all of this, right? Now, think about storytelling. What is storytelling? Storytelling is by focusing on one thing and one thing alone and making sure that your story is sharp, it's aligned in that direction. You don't want to tell them too many things about yourself and in that process end up losing their attention. Correct? So you don't want to tell them that you're hardworking, sincere, ambitious, dedicated, diligent, blah, blah, blah. You want to pick one or two things and you want to focus on it. So what you do is take these post-it notes, correct? And what you could do is pick each trait, right? And say, for this particular trait, which of the post-its or which of the stories I could use to kind of, tell this trait. So now within that blue post-it, you want to rearrange your yellow post-its around it so that you know for this particular trait, I have, let's say, 3 or 4 stories. For the second trait, similarly do the exercise so you have 3 or 4 more traits for the stories for the second trait. Sometimes it may happen that one story may come under 2 traits. It's okay, just duplicate the post-it notes, one for trait A, the next for trait B, the same story, but you feel that it can come under either of these 2 traits. Now that you're structured, you may have 3 or 5 traits. I would like you to pick maybe 2 traits. That's what we want to do. So now what I want you to do is apply an additional filter. Okay, the additional filter is, of these 5 things, what are the 2 traits that I think are the most important, right? What are the 2 traits that I really want the B school to know about me, correct? So you have to do a difficult job of actually saying, I'm going to junk these 3 traits, I'm going to pick these 2 traits. Now that you have these 2 traits, look at the stories around them. Ask yourself these questions. Question number 1. Is it really relevant? Is it something that is directly addressing that trait, or is it like a long connection? For example, let us say that there is something that you did at work, right? It was a project where you actually ended up working late hours, you ended up, kind of going over and above what was expected, correct? If that is the story and the trait that you're trying to kind of showcase is that of you being a hustler. In India, there is a word jugaad. If that is the trait that you want to showcase, is this story the best story for it? Is there a clear connection? Or maybe I pick a better story, right? So that's one way in which you can filter it. The second is, look at the story and ask yourself, what was the impact of the story? One thing that B schools love is they love when the story has an impact. So to ask yourself, does this story have an impact? Does it create, can you quantify it, right? Was this something that generated a lot of revenue for your company, right? So I want to look at that impact part. The third thing that I'm going to ask is this story in the recent past, is it something that happened a long time ago? If it happened a long time ago, my suggestion is to put it as a backdrop. For example, instead of spending a paragraph talking about the rural background that you came from, you could just use it as a modifier, correct? Having come from a rural background where my parents were not literate, that's it. I get a sense, I already can imagine you as coming from a small village, right? I mean, that's enough. Rest of it, you will explain when you actually get to the interview stage. But don't spend too much time. Try to talk or let the stories be more about what is happening now, correct? So now when you apply this filtration process, you will realize that you will be able to structure your thoughts. So from going broad, what we are doing now is going narrow, correct? So we picked all the ideas, now we are kind of narrowing on these ideas. The third thing, which is the writing part. Whenever you're talking about any story, any life incident, correct, you can use the START framework. So let me give you a couple of examples and tell you how the third part, that is the writing part, can be done. So the START framework really says situation. What was the situation or the background? What was the task that you are expected to do? What is the actions that you actually did? If possible, also mention the challenges that you faced. What was the result of this whole thing? And finally, what were your personal takeaways from this particular project or this particular incident or this particular experience? Correct? Now, let me give you an example. So one of my students, he had actually picked an example of how he got into entrepreneurship and how he actually failed at it. Now, I know that you want to talk only about success stories, but a lot of times B schools can even talk about failures, right? So there are schools which explicitly ask you about the time that you failed. So what he did when he spoke about the story is he talked about the situation. He said, look, I come from a middle class background, right? Entrepreneurship is not really in my blood. A lot of my friends, had these cushy jobs. Immediately after graduating, I got a cushy job. I was happy where I was. Now I'm getting a sense of the background, correct? However, there was this bug that bit him, right? He used to read about, people, and he always felt that he had more potential in him. There was this unspoken kind of thing that he wanted to do more than what his day job offered him, right? So there he kind of sets up the premise, and he says, I then went on to start something on my own. So he speaks about the journey first of convincing himself and then convincing people around him. He said it was not easy for me to go and say, I'm going to quit this job and I'm going to pick something that is potentially risky. But he said, if I don't do that, I will never be able to live up to it. I will never be able to look back at my life and, say that, I always have this regret of not having done it, correct? So he kind of set up the task very clearly. Then he said about the action. What is it that he did, right? He started it off with a friend and, the challenges that he faced initially. And this was a 500-word essay, so he had a lot of space for it. So then he spoke about how, there was a particular challenge that eventually he was not able to overcome, correct? So that basically talked about the action. Then the result, he said, 1.5 years after starting up, I had to make this most painful decision of closing down, right? And he said, I still remember that day when I was sitting and, I decided to close. I felt it was a failure, correct? And, we had to sell this. So the result was there. But the beauty is the takeaway part. He said, if I had an option to do that again, I would do that 100 times over. Because he said, I don't think that my failure was that the business failed. I think there was a bigger win for me, which is I explored myself as a person. He said, I grew tremendously, right, in terms of my knowledge of businesses, in terms of my own emotional, quotient. And this is something that not a lot of people speak, but more than anything else, you just need that emotional energy to kind of get back and start doing things again. Correct? So he spoke about that in his takeaway. So that is how your writing eventually comes, right? So just to summarize, you have the initial part, which is the ideation phase. Then you have the structuring phase, and then you have the actual writing phase. And all of this kind of, fits in when you write your application essays. I know this looks like a lot. So in case you have any questions about your essays, in case you want us to, give you any kind of inputs, insights, please let us know. We have a free profile evaluation tool. You can just go ahead and fill this out. Let us know. You can also leave a comment below if there is any specific question or any specific challenge that you are facing that we can help you with. Thanks so much for watching this video.